The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, the 8th of April, 2026. We're live here at CHD TV. In a minute, Brian Hook will be coming on to update us on the science at Children's Health Defense. Then Ken McCarthy has a new book out, so always enjoy talking to him. So we're going to have a segment with him, and then we're going to hand the show over to Dawn Richardson, who has Wayne Rohde on, who is one of my favourite people. So it's a really, really good show today, people. All right, let's start off with Brian Hooker. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Polly. So good to see you. How are you doing today? You look great, bright and fresh.
I'm enjoying the last few moments of being 59. Very shortly, we'll be turning the big 60.
Oh my goodness, you're ready to join our 60 cult. Welcome.
Yes, I am. And I was just saying to Wayne before we went live, we've been doing this for a long time, Brian.
We have. Oh my goodness, when you think back at the Vax Bus, the Australia tour, when Vax first came out in 2016, and you've been doing this way before then with the Autism File.
Yeah, I mean, Billy's about to turn 30. That's how long I've been doing it. Anyway, let's not use this time up on that. I want to talk about the first headline with you for a second before we get into your papers. And it's our only headline, I think, and that's this. So the state lowers vaccine age recommendation in Michigan amid measles outbreak. So they're lowering the MMR to 6 months for certain areas that they feel is dangerous because measles is on that, is that. Brian, how dangerous is that?
There is not much more dangerous than lowering the recommendation to 6 months of age. Remember when the CDC whistleblower came out and I was able to reanalyze that data, we saw that the autism rate for the MMR vaccine on time skyrocketed for African American males when it was given on time between 12 and 15 months. When you move that down to 6 months, you're taking a 6-month-old baby that has a very, very nascent, very, very fragile immune system, and you're subjecting them to 3 live viruses. So the propensity to seizure, the propensity to have some type of neurodevelopmental delay is going to increase astronomically. We've seen that before. We will see that again in this particular instance. And I feel for especially those in underserved minorities, because that's where we've seen, like I said before, in Black boys, that's where we've seen the worst effects for the MMR vaccine.
Yeah, but they're saying, Brian, that this is a very safe vaccine. The MMR is a very safe vaccine and very safe to be given at 6 months. You're head of our science department. Can you bring up the science on that for me?
Well, first of all, it's not safe. And second of all, it has never been tested. The MMR vaccine in its current form, Merck MMR2, has enough virus in it that level of virus has never been tested in any type of clinical study. It's never been tested with a saline placebo, and it has never been tested for efficacy. Remember, because of the whole debacle with the mumps virus, Merck started adding more virus, increasing the virus level of the vaccine in 1999. Then they increased the level of virus in the vaccine again in 2002. And really, there's no upward limit to how much virus they can put in this particular vaccine. More virus means more anaphylaxis. It means more dysregulated immune systems. And it means more that you're exposing these individuals to a virus. It's a live virus. Not only will that cause them harm, but it will also shed to other individuals around them. And it makes absolutely no sense when you really know the truth, not the lies that are being peddled currently by the CDC. not the lies that are being peddled by state departments of public health, then you know that this is a vaccine to be avoided at all costs.
So, Brian, would I be correct in the following statement? So, first of all, Brian and I were in the Mennonite community. We saw babies younger than 6 months with measles, and those babies did not die. They were treated properly by Dr. Ben Edwards. So, I highly recommend you, if you got measles, follow Dr. Ben Edwards' protocol. But if you allow them to give the MMR to your 6-month baby, your baby may die. Your baby may have seizures for life. Your baby may be injured like Billy and Steve for life. Is that correct?
That is correct. We know that the mortality for measles is very, very low. On a population basis, it's about 1 to 2 per million. And even that 1 in 2 have confounding conditions that would create their mortality. They have comorbidities in the first place. So these are not healthy children who are dying of the measles, these 1 or 2 per million. But we know that the MMR vaccine has over 100 reported, not just not estimated, but reported on VAERS deaths, over 100 VAERS deaths in the past 20 years. So we know that the MMR kills more people in the United States than the measles. We also need to point out that VAERS is woefully inadequate at capturing adverse events, and that's probably captured about 1% of all the adverse events that have occurred with the MMR vaccine. So you take that death rate, it could be as high as 10,000 children who have died from the MMR vaccine. We just don't know. We also know that it causes febrile seizures. Febrile seizures are not minor. They can lead to epilepsy. They do increase the prevalence of epilepsy. If a child has a febrile seizure, their chance of getting epilepsy goes up about 5 times over and against a child that's never had a febrile seizure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I mean, how many times do we have to talk about this? But we're so censored at CHD that it's hard to get it out. So people, please do share Brian's advice to absolutely every parent you can get hold of. Right. Now, you talking of lies, you were lied to many years ago about the vaccines being safe and effective. Look, let's put this article up that you did. Well, the defender ran an article on you. You did an interview. Anyway. Talk about it. I guess there's a time.
Well, this was an interview with Dr. Tony Abel, a wonderful pediatric chiropractor out of Chicago. He look at his T-shirt. I love it. Experience Miracles. He runs a practice called Pediatric Experience, and their slogan is Experience Miracles. And it was such a wonderful interview. And what I did was I told my story of my son, Steve, who, when he had an active ear infection, ended up receiving 3 vaccines, 2 thimerosal-containing vaccines, 1 live virus vaccine, fevered for 18 days afterwards, and then once the fever broke, lost everything, regressed into autism, and was diagnosed with full-blown autism 3 months later. And so we cover that particular story in detail. I'm so thankful for Defender and Jill Erzin, who included this in CHD Defender Views. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about my story, check it out at the Defender at childrenshealthdefense.org.
Right. Well, actually, it's going to be in the show notes, so people can just.
I will. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Brian, talk to us about what's going on in the science department. 2 papers.
2 papers are coming out very, very soon. The first paper is a vax versus unvaxxed study. We want to continue to do this work. Nobody outside of a few independent researchers will consider an unvaccinated group of children. And we have an unvaccinated group of children, about 4,000 children. The youngest is 4 years of age. We followed up every child since birth. So, and we know they've never been vaccinated. And what we're finding is when we look at partially vaccinated kids, their propensity to get recurring infections, this is recurring ear infections, recurring respiratory infections, and recurring strep infections, goes up at least double for each of these types of infections. So these children are not only getting more neurodevelopmental disorders, not only getting more autoimmune disorders, but they're more sickly. Their innate immune system takes a hit every time they get a vaccine. Every time you get a vaccine, you're compromising your innate immune system more. We saw this almost textbook during COVID, but we show this directly in vaccinated versus unvaccinated children. Those that are getting vaccines are more sickly. They have a greater propensity to get sick. I mean, these ear infections were 3 infections in a rolling 12-month period, 3 strep in a rolling 12-month period, or 3 respiratory infections. And so this is not something that you want. This is a one-way ticket to more antibiotics, to more medicine, to missing school. And these children in general are more sickly.
Yeah, and Brian, also, we've seen this out there. The kids that are vaccinated, say that catch measles, and the unvaccinated kids that catch measles, the vaccinated kids do super badly when they catch things like measles and chickenpox or whatever it may be.
Right.
Immune systems are completely messed up, right? So that should be another warning to you parents out there. These vaccines not just destroy their lives, their immune system, they're going to do worse than the unvaccinated child. Do you think this is possibly the biggest lie ever told?
Really, if it isn't the biggest lie ever told, it's in the top 2. The fact that you would take something like an aluminum salt adjuvant and you would give it to a baby over and over and over again. We know that that dysregulates the immune system. We know that that is an atomic bomb in the innate immune system. It not only does it stimulate the acquired immune system, which is what they're trying to focus on in vaccination, but it stimulates the innate immune system and it aggravates it and it creates a level of confusion in the immune system. So it's going after antigens that are basically nonsense or are self. You know, these are basically autoimmune antibodies that are being created. And then what it will do is it will focus so much on those new antigens that it misses the mark against the common cold, against strep, against bacteria that overgrow during ear infections. And that's one of the reasons why these kids get so sick.
And then what about the other paper?
The other paper is on the connection between vaccinations and mitochondrial autism. We're currently working on that paper. Mitochondrial autism is probably anywhere between 30 to 50% of all autism have some type of mitochondrial disorder. 5 to 10 have been diagnosed with mitochondrial disease, and up to 80% have some type of lab marker of mitochondrial dysfunction. So we know that dysregulated mitochondria are pretty ubiquitous in autism. And so we look at how vaccines damage the mitochondria directly, how damaged mitochondria lead to immune reactions, autoimmune reactions, and lead to neuroimmune dysregulation that causes autism. So we're making the linkage. We did this earlier in a paper on aluminum adjuvants in autism. Now we're basically taking general vaccine components and taking it through a mitochondrial pathway and then showing mechanistically, biochemically, from a cell biology standpoint and from an epidemiological standpoint, how autism is connected to vaccines, specifically through mitochondrial damage.
Your department are doing amazing work uncovering all of this. Quick question, can you put that right, mitochondrial? Because I've never met anybody who's vaccine injured that's ever returned to normal pre-vaccine injury, completely returned to normal.
Well, there are a lot of things in autism that are irreversible damage, and we did not really know that in earnest until 2019. A paper came out of Matthew Anderson's laboratory in Harvard University. It was a cadaver study looking at cadaver brains. It's D'Stasio et al. 2019, and it shows that the astroglia, which are the immune cells of the brain, or one type of immune cell of the brain, are permanently and irreparably damaged. So I do know specifically children where autism was reversed. They're typically very, very young. I am encouraged by things like spellers that are bringing new life to non-speaking autistic children. But the reality is damage gets caused. And this damage is irreversible. If we can rely on the neuroplasticity of the brain, maybe we can build neural pathways around this particular damage. But the message is clear that vaccines do damage to the brain. Vaccines do damage to the gut. Vaccines do damage to the physiology. All of that can and does lead to autism.
Yeah, I know we're out of time, but I just want to say one thing. I spoke to a mother who we all know very well, whose son has recovered and is now at college and all that kind of stuff. But she said he's walking around with tons of band-aids on. If he eats the wrong food or does something that will set it off again, he will go right back to a state that is not acceptable. So the point I'm trying to make here is to the parents who think it's a good idea to vaccinate. Once that needle goes in, there's really no coming back from that. The damage is done.
Exactly. You cannot unvaccinate a child. You absolutely can. And one vaccine is all that it takes.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I love having you on CHD TV. Thank you so much for being on this morning. I know you're very busy, so I'm going to let you go and we'll speak soon.
Thank you so much, Polly. You have a great morning.
I will. All right, everyone, we're going to bring on Ken McCarthy now. Good morning, Ken.
Morning.
How are you now? First of all, you should tell everyone about yourself in case they've forgotten, but I doubt they have.
I've written a couple of books. Fauci's First Fraud. I made a film by the same title in 2020. It was something that Bobby referred to quite a bit in his book on Fauci. I think along with Celia Farber and some other people, we helped Bobby see that the AIDS component of the COVID fraud was huge. And he put quite a bit of chapters on that subject.
And you've got a new book out now, though, right?
I have a new book that I'm giving away to CHD members. You can go to hepbbook.com. It's the rough draft. So there's going to be misspellings. There's going to be, all kinds of problems, but it's free. And the reason I want it out now is because Hep B is sort of the key issue, I believe, right now. We had a brief moment where it looked like they were going to stop giving it to newborns. I don't, then it got reversed. I don't know what the legal status is. But as you know, they're very good at adding vaccines. They're very bad at removing them from the schedule. This is one vaccine that we can realistically, I think, remove. Parents can certainly remove it if they're informed. And this book is the A to Z history of the whole Hep B fraud. And it is an absolute fraud from A to Z. And it is exactly in the way I came to this is when I saw COVID come, I said, wait a minute, I've seen this Fauci guy before. By the way, I'm 66. So I was in my 20s in the 1980s in New York City. And I lived through the terror campaign that if you ever had sex with anybody, you probably are going to get AIDS and die. In fact, it was Oprah Winfrey who went on TV on her 40 million person show and told the audience that by 1990, 1 out of 5 of them would be dead from AIDS. That's the level of terror campaign they threw at us in the 1980s. So I knew who Fauci was. I know Gary Null. I know Celia Farber, one of the great writers against the AIDS fraud. So I was aware of this for a long time as a consumer of the information. So when Fauci came along, I said, okay, it's another fraud because it's Fauci. And here's the deal. To have a fraud, you need a fraudster. And that's Fauci. And a fraudster needs a playbook. All right. So what's the playbook? The playbook is very simple. We've discovered an exotic new virus from a bizarre source, a flying, a pig or a bat, or in this case of Hep B, it was from an Aborigine. That's not a bizarre source, but it's exotic to us just as we would be exotic to them. They found an antigen in somebody in Australia. And the guy that found it thought it caused leukemia and leprosy. And then they decided, no, let's make it cause Hep B. Now, Hep B is actually a modern name for something called serum hepatitis. Okay, hepatitis, ancient disease. It's real. It happens. It comes from contaminated food, contaminated water. Hippocrates talked about it, the Chinese talked about it, nothing new there. But in the 19th century, there was a new kind of hepatitis. And after a while, they gave it the name serum hepatitis because they knew it came from injections. Okay? This new brand of hepatitis, never before seen or at least reported on the planet. And we had a lot of good doctors, Chinese, Persian, Greek. They're pretty astute guys. They never saw this until we started sticking things into people's bloodstream. So they called it serum hepatitis. And that got changed to hepatitis A comes from the water and the food. Hepatitis B comes from bloodborne disease. Okay? So then what they did, and it's the same thing as COVID, the same thing as HIV. You can have this thing in your blood when they do a test, and you can have 0 symptoms. You're not sick in any way. You'll never be sick in any way for the rest of your life. And it usually clears up by itself. Okay. But what they did was they said, this is actually the leading cause of liver cancer. They just pulled this out of thin air. I mean, now it's known to be a fraud. But during the AIDS and the Hep B thing were happening at the same time. We had the explosion of 24-hour news reporting with CNN, never before in history. And CNN needed something to put on that channel. So they put AIDS hysteria, HIV hysteria. And AIDS is, collapse of the autoimmune system, absolutely real. I'm going to say does not come from a virus. In fact, you had somebody yesterday that said the same thing, a former reporter for the Times of London who studied it his whole life. So it's the same playbook. We found this, we missed this virus. We'd never seen it before because it came from such a weird place. And boy, is it deadly. And they were saying in the 1980s that Hep B was more deadly than HIV because it led to liver cancer. And they said that it was the second leading cause of cancer on the planet. All these things turned out to be frauds. So they created this absolute public hysteria about the idea of Hep B. They started testing everybody for Hep B. And of course, it's not a real test for the virus. It's a test for the presence of a fragment of an antigen. And they found it everywhere. And they decided, oh boy, we need to vaccinate everybody against this. So the first vaccination was made from blood plasma. And then they decided to get fancy, and they started making it from genetically modified yeast. Okay.
What does that do to a body?
Well, let's just look at, without even saying what it might do, let's just talk about the ingredients. So they take genetically modified yeast, they feed it with genetically modified sugar, which comes from corn, GMO corn. The protein is provided by genetically modified soybeans. Okay. And, we wonder why glyphosate is appearing in vaccines. There's the reason, folks, because once you put, once there's glyphosate on corn syrup or whatever they turn the corn into, there's going to be trace elements of glyphosate. Do they have a process for removing glyphosate? I don't think they even bother. I don't think they even try to get it out of the vaccine. So now they've got this genetically modified yeast that's saturated with glyphosate ingredients, and then they burst the cell wall to get into it to get the antigen out. Well, they use hexane to do that, which is a neurotoxin. Okay, and then they use some physical means too. And I was talking with somebody earlier this morning about this, and it's like, do you know any industrial process that's 100% pure? I mean, even gold, they can't refine gold to 100%. It's not, the best gold you can get is 99.9% gold. Well, it's the same thing with an industrial process. Once an ingredient goes in, yeah, you can try to get it out, but you're not getting it all out. So just starting right there are so many unhealthy, dangerous trace elements in this vaccine. It's crazy. And, we had a Nobel Prize winner back, I think it was 1913. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name. The guy that discovered anaphylaxis, right? And he said, look, if you put undigested protein of any kind into a bloodstream, you are going to cause problems to that person. This was over 100 years ago, he said this. So obviously there's bits of protein in the Hep B vaccine. There has to be. They can't get it all out, right? So that's the brilliant manufacturing method. And what happened was previous to this, when you made Hep B vaccines, it was a very laborious process. You needed gallons and gallons of contaminated blood. That was their original raw material. And then you would turn that into a vaccine, and that could take anywhere from 26 weeks to an entire year. So it was an expensive vaccine. So the very first vaccine ever invented that used this genetically modified process was the Hep B vaccine. So they went from having just a handful of this, and they used it very sparingly on, it was originally like if you were an intravenous drug addict and you were a street prostitute and you had hemophilia, that your private physician might say, you might want to get this vaccine. Okay. Then they expanded it to, hey, if you're a gay man, you need this vaccine. And then once they could make it in container shipload quantities for a few pennies a dose, that's when they put it in the babies. And they used, go ahead, Polly.
Well, I just want to say that everything you've just described, I didn't know, disgusting. And they put it in the newborn baby. And when I was on the bus, met these two beautiful boys. They were 2 years old and they couldn't even hold their heads up. All they'd had is a Hep B vaccine. So I'm so grateful that you are slamming this out there, because people have no idea. And even now, Ken, the young mums that do have their babies in hospital are still saying that Bobby Kennedy's crazy and that the babies need the Hep B at birth. So the hospitals are not on board with the CDC's recommendation that they don't have it.
No, obviously, I mean, they have a whole assembly line. And, they put this thing, vitamin K. They also have a vitamin K injection. That came first. And that it's literally an assembly line, right? Well, we're already given the vitamin K shot. Now we can just easily slip this thing in. Now, the thing is that it looks to me from all so there's a bunch of different elements that promoted this. Number one, the military, okay? The military wanted a cheap Hep B vaccine. They wanted it for a long time. They want all kinds of vaccines. And they did something remarkable in World War II. Just 4 weeks after Pearl Harbor, they injected 300,000 troops with the yellow fever vaccine, and they gave over 20,000 of them what they called serum hepatitis, and dozens of them died. So I'm sure a guy at the top told what's the guy, the general, the medical general, the Surgeon General.
Surgeon General, yeah.
Said, look, solve this problem. So what they did during World War II is they took conscientious objectors and they said, hey, you can volunteer for this noble cause. And they set out to deliberately infect them with hepatitis in either through blood or through other ways that you can get hepatitis. And they made these men sick. This is unprecedented. This is such a violation of medical ethics that when the Nazis were on trial, in the doctor's trial, they pointed to what the U.S. had done to these conscientious objectors and said, look, you guys did the same thing. How can we be on trial for the same thing that you did? Okay. So then what happened is they moved it to prisons, Joliet Prison in Illinois, and they continued to infect people with hepatitis. And then they moved it to Willowbrook Institute. Now, those of you that grew up in New York City or in the New York City area, or you kind of know your history, know that was an absolute, it was in Staten Island, it was an absolute hellhole. I won't even describe the horrors that went on there. It was an institution for children with severe intellectual impairment. And they were experimenting on those children there. They were injecting them and deliberately trying to infect them with hepatitis B. And the guy that did that is a guy named Krugman. And they were funded by the U.S. military. And the U.S. military didn't just provide the funds, they also pushed the agenda and ran cover for this guy. Now, he eventually got caught. In fact, it was Robert Kennedy Sr. who went to Willowbrook and was one of the first official people to blow the whistle on the horrors of that institution. And then finally, it came out that they were experimenting on these children. It was terrible. And that is the man who is considered the pioneer of the Hep B vaccine. This monster. Okay? So again, and now that's the military train, right? there was another train. There used to be a thing called Eugenics in the early 20th century. And it, you know, it was big in England, big in the US. The rich people loved it. And the theory was there are good people and there are inferior people. And we need less inferior people. So let's figure out how to get rid of them. And one of the ways they figured out how to get rid of them was forced sterilization. And there was actually a law passed in California. We were talking about California earlier off camera. That enabled forced sterilization. And California was the #1 state for forced sterilization. Okay, so when the Nazis took the eugenics thing a little too far, the Americans had to rebrand it. And they called it population control. And the Ford Foundation loved it, and the Rockefeller Foundation loved it, and they were over in India. And they decided, you know what, voluntary prophylactics, or I forget what you call it, doesn't work. Sterilization is really the way to go. So they taught the Indians how to sterilize their people. And believe it or not, Indira Gandhi, not the best person in the world, when she did a kind of like a lock the government down, and her son went bizarre and went and did mass coercive sterilization. They would surround a village in India, 3 o'clock in the morning, with bullhorns and say, all the men come out now and bring your sterilization documents. If you couldn't present a sterilization document, they took you on a bus and forcibly sterilized you. They did this to women too. And then when you were done, they'd hand you some painkillers and send you home. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? The very same people who were big on population control, and by the way, once that came out, they had to change the name population control. That story was a big story decades ago. People knew about it. It was everywhere, and it was a horror. So they had to rebrand again, and they called it global health. Global health. And some of the very guys, in fact, one specific guy, his name is Mahoney. I've some last name Mahoney. He's one of the people that works with Peter Hortense. They're at Baylor. They're the ones that are writing letters about how crazy Bobby is for trying to take the Hep B vaccine off. This fellow went from Ford and sterilization programs straight into immunization programs. And their first project, his first project when he left the Ford Foundation, was the Hep B vaccine. So you have the military wanting a cheap vaccine. You have these former eugenists, population control, now global health people, and they made this conscious decision. They said, "Look, we'd like the rest of the world to be healthy, but getting them water and safe water and decent nutrition, it's just too expensive. It's not going to work. The only thing that's going to work is to immunize them." So Merck got a deal. I see my time's coming up. So Merck got a special deal. They did an end run. And this is how America got the vaccine. And I'll tell this really fast. Merck got a special deal. They wouldn't grant, somebody else owned the patent rights to this process. And they wouldn't give Merck a U.S., a global, a unique U.S. license, a monopoly. But they said, we'll give you an overseas monopoly. All right. So this guy Mahoney and a whole bunch of CDC people and USAID people went to Indonesia. They went to Thailand. They pumped these kids full of Hep B, and they generated data. And then they brought the safe and effective data back to the United States. Now, remember, there was a horror campaign, a terror campaign going on at the same time in the 80s. Worse than AIDS. Everybody's going to get it. It leads to liver cancer. Okay, so they took that bogus data and that hysteria, and they went to the committee of vaccination. I always forget what you call it. And then they ran it right through. And next thing you know, American babies are getting the Hep B vaccine at birth. They do this in 110 countries. They don't do it in England, I don't think. They don't do it in Germany. They don't do it in Switzerland. They don't do it in France. They don't do it in Spain. They don't do it in Japan. They only do it in poor countries that didn't have the ability to push back. And so I see my time is up, but that's the basic shape of how this happened.
Ken, we have to get you back on again, but just remind everyone how they can get the book, and you're giving it away free, right?
I'm giving it's my rough draft version, so a lot of misspelling. So, but it's free, so you get and then you come to hepbbook.com. I'll give you this very rough draft. you'll give me your email address. When the regular book is ready, I'll just let you know so you can buy it. I hope that when this book comes out, it gets support, because this is what we can hand new mothers or mothers to be. What you don't want this Hep B vaccine at birth. We got to start there. We got to start somewhere. We got to cut that thing off at the start. So anyway, that's my
Ken, thank you for all the work you've done, all the brilliant books, and what the nurses saw as well. That was amazing. So thank you for all the work that you do, and we will definitely, without a doubt, get you back on again soon.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, we're going to hand over now to Dawn Richardson for her amazing interview.
Hello, my name is Dawn Richardson, and welcome to Advocacy Lifeline. You're live here on CHD TV. Thank you so much for joining us today. The purpose of this show is to empower you, our viewers, to use your voice to affect change in law, policy, and public opinion through education and action for issues that are important to you and your family. This is not to be construed as medical or legal advice, and these views are my own and not necessarily the views of CHD or the National Vaccine Information Center, where I work full-time as the Director of Advocacy. Before we get started today, I saw in the comments on last week's show, where we did a really comprehensive show on vaccine bill trends, that people were asking about a transcript because there was so much information. Yes, I do go back and I look at your comments that you leave on the show in the chat, and I wanted to let you know there's always a transcript. If you go to the Children's Health Defense website, go to CHD TV and click on shows and go to Advocacy Lifeline, and you click on the episode you want, there's a little link there. Just click and the transcript pops up. So y'all have that. So if you can't take notes for a certain show and you want some information, you want to go back, that's where you can get it. Okay, today we are going to talk about helping Minnesota stop the attack on their vaccine exemptions. There are currently 5 bills filed in Minnesota, ranging from flat out eliminating vaccine exemptions, the conscientious exemption, to finding ways to restrict them and make them harder to get. These bills are SF 4458, House File 3239, and Senate File 3439, their companions, and then more companions, House File 3775 and Senate File 4017. Now, we're going to get into the details about these bills shortly, but I just want to give you some background here to set this up. With the Minnesota legislative session not ending until May 18th, these bills still pose a threat because there's still enough time for legislators to pass any of these bills, or more concerning, to amend them onto other moving bills and pass those. So getting to the chase on what we're asking for people to do who are in Minnesota, we're asking you to take a few minutes and contact your own Minnesota state rep and senator and ask them to oppose these 5 bills as well. And this is important, to oppose any other attempt to remove or restrict vaccine exemptions. After the recent close call in South Carolina, where they had a bill to remove the religious exemption for the MMR vaccine, luckily that was voted down in subcommittee, but we don't want to take any chances. I take very seriously any attack on vaccine exemptions, because that is what parents have right now until we're able to remove mandates to be able to protect their children. So today we want to educate people about these bills and elevate grassroots opposition to them. This information is going to be helpful to our viewers in other states as well, so you all can have the information to respond to these growing threats to vaccine exemptions appearing across the country and even in your home state. Let's get into the details on what's going on and what you can do to help. We are very fortunate today to have a special guest, Wayne Rohde, on. Wayne He lives in Minnesota. He has a vaccine injured son. He's an author and expert on the problems with the vaccine injury compensation program. He maintains the website, thevaccinecourt.com, which is his landing page for his book, The Vaccine Court 2.0. Wayne, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about what's happening here in Minnesota. Crazy.
Great. Can you please just go a little bit more into your background? What happened to you in your life that moved you to become an advocate for informed consent, the dangers on vaccines, the importance of informed consent, and then the limitations on the injury compensation program, and so many other things that you have known to become an expert in?
My wife and I, we just were first-time parents, and our boys were born in 1997 in October. We had twins. And it wasn't until a year later that we took them in for their first immunizations, their first vaccines. They were born a little premature, so we held out by a friend of ours who was a nurse, and she said, just hold on until they get fully developed. At the age of 13 months, we took our boys in, and the MMR vaccine was what was first given. And our son, Austin, received it, and he cried for about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and then he settled down. Nicholas had a severe reaction right away, an anaphylactic reaction. And it went on for several months of crying, spiking of fevers, vomiting, diarrhea, everything. And then after a couple of weeks, it calmed down, but we were constantly talking to the pediatrician. They said, everything's going to be fine. From there, we noticed over the next 18 months, a decline in his developmental milestones. He started to lose his speech. He lost his desire to play with his brother. And then we noticed the classic where he was watching and following along the ceiling fans up in our ceilings of our home. Later diagnosed with what they call severe regressive autism. We were living in Oklahoma at the time. Boys were born in Dallas, Texas, but then we moved to Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, we were just trying to figure out what to do for Nicholas. And I spent a lot of my time advocating at the Capitol for insurance coverage, which was not present for autism and other disabilities, for children with other disabilities. And that took us all the way through to, and it became a very nasty fight in 2007, 2008, 2009 in in Oklahoma, but across the country. By 2010, we had to make a decision, and we moved to Minnesota. And we are still just fighting for insurance coverage. My wife was digging into vaccine injury, and she was actually contacted MVIC, your organization, and we were given an attorney, Cliff Shoemaker. We sent all of our medical information off to him, and he came back to us in 3 weeks and said, you guys have a great case for encephalopathy, a brain injury, encephalitis with an anaphylactic reaction, except for one problem. We were time barred, meaning the statute of limitations in the MVICP, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. So we were prevented from filing a claim for injury of any sort. I had that and kind of put that off to the side because I was still dealing with insurance coverage, and we just couldn't get going in Oklahoma. So we moved to Minnesota. And that's where I started thinking back about what we needed to do for Nicholas. And I was contacted by my good friend Lou Conti, who was a co-author along with Mary Holland, now CEO of Children's Health Defense, when they were writing their paper, the Unanswered Questions paper. And Lou says, why don't you start talking to these families, because you are already visiting with quite a few of them, and start interviewing them. So that's what I did. And I contacted over 285 families. and talked to them about their experiences within the MVICP. And I stayed away from the autism community as much as I could because I wanted to learn about the other vaccine injuries. And then I was approached by Skyhorse Publishing out of New York City. They wanted me to put everything together in my first book, which is The Vaccine Court. And that was published in 2014. And I started digging into the processes of this federal program and learning the nuances of what happens to these families, their journeys, their experiences dealing with our federal government. And you're actually suing the Secretary of HHS. You're not suing the manufacturers. And from there, I just kept digging and digging and digging. And then I released my second book, The Vaccine Court 2.0, which is a revised and updated a book about the program back in June of 2021. So that's where I was with there. And I constantly keep digging. Now I've been, exploring what's happening in other countries, their global compensation programs. And I put together some other programs. And so this is what I do now. And so keep an eye on Minnesota. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a story, Wayne. I mean, you have been through it and you're continuing to go through it. The other day when we were talking, I was asking about your son, and you said that he will never be able to live on his own. You will be caring for him until the day that you die. And that is what happens to families that have vaccine injured children. It's very, very sad. And you have been selfless in your advocacy to help other parents. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Well, let's get on and talk about Minnesota. Can you explain to people what the legislative climate looks like right now in Minnesota? Which parties are advocating for what? They're fighting over different things. It's really kind of a hotbed mess out there.
Has been. And up until last year, in 2023, the Democratic Party of Minnesota had what they call known as a trifecta. They controlled the House, they controlled the state Senate, and then they had the governorship. So 2023 and 2024, the Democrats controlled the entire state legislature. And we were scrambling because we were trying to prevent any type of legislation to remove vaccines or to add more mandates, et cetera, et cetera. And we were fortunate to defeat those and push back on those efforts. In 2025, the legislature kind of took a twist here. And the House, we had from the last election cycle in 2024, an even split. So we have Republicans and Democrats evenly split. And there was a kind of like a holdout, if you will, by the Democrats in the House not to come up to the Capitol until there was an agreement. And we were fortunate enough to have where the Speaker of the House is a Republican who believed that we should have the families. One of her talking points is families should have the right to decide. Parents have the right to decide. So we have an evenly split House, but the Senate is still dominated by the Democrats, and we still have a Democratic governor. And their talking points are is that we need to vaccinate all of our children and add more to them. But
Yeah.
and it's kind of crazy on this. This is that in the past, historically, parental rights has been a top priority. But over the last 6 to 8 years, that has really flipped on its head. And it became evident this year. This is the last year of the election cycle of our two-year cycle here at the state capitol. We've had these 5 bills introduced in the Senate, along with companion bills introduced in the House. And the one that really, really concerned us was the MMR exemption, removing exemptions for the MMR vaccine.
Well, let's start going through these bills. And I had the other bill. Let's start with Senate, and we'll talk about that one next. But Senate File 4458, if we can bring that up. This bill eliminates the conscientiously held belief exemptions to vaccine mandates for school, childcare, higher education, and participation in extracurricular activities by homeschooled students. The bill also eliminates the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices from the list of organizations whose recommendations the state health commissioner must use when modifying vaccine requirements. So right now this bill hasn't moved. It's in the Senate Education Policy. It does not have a companion, but the bill is sponsored by Senator Alice Mann. And what's interesting is she is a Democrat. She's an ER doctor, and on December 1st of 2025, she announced that she is no longer going to run. She's not going to run for a new term. So she has nothing to lose by going all out against vaccine exemptions. So I want to hear from you a little bit, Wayne, on some talking points, some points you can bring up against this bill. What can families talk about to their legislators on why this bill is a bad idea?
First off, in Minnesota, maybe other states, when they talk about exemption rights, it does extend to the homeschooling community here in Minnesota. So homeschoolers are affected by exemption bills. Other states, they may not be. But the removal of exemptions, basically, the part of the bill that's written is that they don't want to follow ACIP, Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices from the CDC. Minnesota was known for a long time as the CDC of the North because we had several members of the Department of Health being on all these committees within the CDC. If you notice, they want to get rid of ACIP because they don't believe where the current administration's direction for immunization practices. But the concern here with removal exemptions is that it's took a long time to fight and to pass legislation to allow parents to exercise their rights under legal exemptions for their children. And now we're trying to remove that. And this bill, as you mentioned, does not have a companion. So one, it's parked in the Senate Education Policy Committee. We don't believe it's going to move at all, because one, there is no House companion.
You know, I'm just going to say one thing. I mean, people in New York said the same thing for multiple years. They had bill to remove exemptions, and one day they had the hearing, they passed it out of one chamber, they had the hearing, they passed it out of the other chamber, and it was in law in one day. So I appreciate your insight, but people need to fight like hell to stop this bill and the other bills, regardless of, weighing the probabilities, because number one, vaccines can cause injury and death. Parents should always have the final say. Two, the providers who give them are exempt from any kind of liability, which you're an expert on that side of things in the vaccine court. The alternative, the manufacturers don't have to pay a dime to anybody. And vaccines fail sometimes. They're not foolproof. People who are fully vaccinated still get diseases. So don't punish the kids whose families that chose not to get certain vaccines from having access to school or daycare. It's unfair, it's discriminatory, it's bad policy, and nobody loves that kid more than their parents, and their parents are going to make the best decisions. And sometimes that means not giving them any vaccines or stopping vaccination because they've had a reaction, and doctors don't want to write the exemptions, so the parents have to take it into their hands. So, it's very, very concerning. I'm glad that this one is less likely to move, but just because taking things from New York and all the other states that have lost exemptions, California, Maine, Connecticut, we've got to take it seriously and fight fight it. Wayne, how many doses of vaccines are kids getting today? I can't even keep up with the schedule. Do you know? Last I heard it was 72, but it's like it keeps changing, and then I don't know. Where is it? Do you know?
Here in Minnesota, it is 72.
Okay.
Now, some states may be a little bit more. I know that a couple of years ago, they tried to add more to the schedule, another booster for MMR and another DTaP for MMR here in Minnesota, or DTaP for the schedule. The concern we have is these bills that are out there, the rules of the Senate and rules of the House say they cannot move forward because of they passed what they call the changeover time. But here's where it gets scary, and this is where we need to really be vigilant, is that the legislation, the actual language is still alive, and they get put into these, what they call these omnibus policy bills. And that's where, and we will not really know about it until, as you said, what happened in New York, one day it just pops into an omnibus policy bill, which is what they're trying to do now. And that's where we have to contact our legislators and say, please don't allow this to happen.
Yeah, preemptively, they need to be educated. They need to be ready for it. Yeah.
Right. And these omnibus bills are what is really concerning, and we have to stay on it. Now, the other concern is that once they put into the omnibus bill, then you have the companion omnibus bill from the other chamber, and there's a conference committee, members get together and hash things out. There's really not a lot of public interaction here and hearings where people can come and testify. This is the dangerous part of our legislative process. You have the standalone bills that probably are going to stay that way, but any of this language can just overnight appear in an omnibus bill and pass. And even our advocates up at the state capitol, the legislators that are with us, they might not have a chance to do anything about it because the chairs of these committees want certain things done, and it's scary. So we're on it every day, trying to figure out what's going on. But this is where we have to get with everybody right now.
For sure. And just, with that 72 dose schedule, some legislators are perseverating over, exemptions are going up. What they're failing to acknowledge is that the number of vaccines are going up as well. An exemption counts as an exemption, whether it's for one dose of one vaccine or all 72 doses of all vaccines. Most kids have some vaccines. So they're henny penny, the sky is falling. They're not acknowledging the massiveness, bloating of this schedule and how many shots kids are getting. Most of them don't know. They just remember the few they got as a kid, and they have no idea what that graphic that Lou put up before with the kid is the human pincushion. There wasn't an inch left for another spot to give a shot. They're getting so many. So, just illustrating, that's not necessarily where they give them, but it's just illustrating how many. So, okay, so let's move on to the next bill. This is the one you said you were concerned about. Companion bills, House File 3239 and Senate File 3439. They eliminate this pair eliminates the conscientious belief exemption for measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination for children attending school or daycare beginning August 1st, 2026. A parent of a child with an existing conscientious exemption for MMR vaccination may resubmit the exemption again or provide proof of an MMR vaccination for their children, but after July 1st, 2026, no other children can receive a conscientious belief exemption for the MMR vaccine. So they're taking a page out of Connecticut, and Connecticut was able to get their removal of the exemption through by grandfathering current parents. And I remember parents, crying because how are they going to have some of their kids be okay? They have a family history of reactions, but the younger kids who aren't in school yet, they're going to be forced or they can't go to school. Horrible situation. So that grandfather clause is rough, and they're concentrating on the MMR vaccine. So this was just attempted in South Carolina. Fortunately, it was canned in the subcommittee, a vote of 6-2, so it didn't go any further. But here in Minnesota, the bill was not only referred to the House Health and Finance Committee, it was also, the Senate bill has already passed out of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. Now, I just want to mention that the House bill is sponsored by Representative Mike Freeberg, and Representative Freeberg is a Democrat attorney who's also currently running for state senator. So take note, people. On his media page, he has this article posted from the Washington Post. U.S. vaccination rates are plunging. Look up where your school stands. He's trying to create fear and division in the community, and he's been doing this for a while, because he is also the author of House File 96 in 2017, trying to replace the conscientious exemption with one with lesser strength of a personal belief exemption, and requiring parents to meet with a doctor and get a written statement from them in order to take an exemption. Luckily, the bill failed to move, but he is definitely not a friend to medical freedom and parental rights. And then the Senate file that's already passed the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, now it's sitting in Senate Education Policy Committee. The bill is authored by Senator Liz Bolden. She's a Democrat and a nurse. She started as an ICU nurse. She's done a lot of nursing. She is the assistant majority leader in the Senate, and she's a member of the committees this bill is going through. So tell us, why are you so concerned about these bills, and what are some of the reasons why these bills should not move?
Representative Freiberg, who I've been butting heads with since 2015, he's been trying to get rid of exemptions in the state of Minnesota. He prefers to have no exemptions. He's been on record in interviews in the past, says he doesn't believe in exemptions. And he has a child with autism, but he doesn't, once again, vaccines don't cause autism is his mindset. And Senator Bolden, I believe she's from the Mayo Clinic area down in Rochester. So that's always going to be a rough area for us, because Mayo Clinic is very powerful in the state regarding advocacy. The MMR exemption is the one they're using. Why I'm really concerned about this one, because they're using the fear, as you mentioned, fear mongering. That's all they're doing here to push their legislation. They're trying to stoke fear in the hearts of every family that measles is very dangerous, and that's their motive. They don't really care about the science.
Yeah, families need to tell their legislators that measles deaths declined 98% from 1900s to 1963, before the measles vaccine was even introduced. And this was due to advancements in living conditions, nutrition, healthcare. But yet there are over 100,000 cases where measles vaccine was administered, causing an adverse event to be reported to the system, where over 11,000 were classified as serious or the person died. You're right, they're fear mongering, and they're also not acknowledging the measles vaccine effectiveness wanes. It wanes significantly. We talked about this in other episodes, but you're talking a large percentage of adults that have no longer any kind of protective effect from the vaccine, and even kids as young as 15 years old, 60% can go on and get subclinical infections, and where you're not even knowing that they're vaccinated, and that they also, you're not even knowing that they have measles, and they can infect and spread it to others. We've got references to that we'll put up here. So people need to be educated. It's not deadly. Most people recover totally fine. that people's immunity wanes, it makes no sense to go after the kids because the manufacturer failed to make a vaccine that holds and works for everyone, and they continue to rake in profit as they push more and more doses. It's just wrong. So yes, some education has to go on here to help legislators say no to this stuff if they see it pop up in one of these omnibus bills, or if this bill continues to move because it's already passed out of committee.
So Freiberg is very good at stoking the fears because he brings up the measles outbreak that happened in the Somali community back in 2011 here in Minnesota, and then also again in 2017. But if you go back and look at, and I've asked him point blank, and he couldn't answer me, this is that what happened to all the children, the 72 children that were infected in 2011, or the children that were infected in 2017, what happened to them? What was the medical outcome from them getting measles? And he couldn't tell me. He says, well, people die from measles, all these other things. I said, okay, what happened to all the kids that developed measles in this state of Minnesota? Well, nothing happened to them. There was a serious event with one of the adults, but that was because of other issues, immune compromised adult. But the children were fine. They're actually have now lifelong immunity to measles, but it was in the Somali communities. So
Yeah,
he wants to stoke the fear out of and to try to pass legislation instead of actually debating it on its merits. And the merits are is the MMR vaccine it as you said, wanes very quickly. It doesn't last, and it's incredible. So that's why I'm very concerned about him.
100% vaccinated still get measles. So if you project down the road, he doesn't even have a solution to measles cases. And I'll bring up that in Texas, we had in the beginning of 2025 a big measles outbreak, you may have remembered. And we still passed a bill that would hold pharmaceutical companies liable for vaccine injuries if they advertised in the states. And we expanded vaccine exemptions to make the forms available online in the midst of that outbreak, because legislators here were educated that this was all fear mongering. This was making a mountain out of a molehill, and that if kids can get treated and they can have support, they do fine. And, they even tried to take kids who were mismanaged medically and call them measles deaths when it was basically medical malpractice. And so terrible situation there. But I did want to bring up, in the state of Minnesota, the Constitution says in Section 16, it protects the freedom of conscience, including, quote, the right of every man to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience, and it prohibits the state from infringing on such rights. These bills violate the individual's right to freedom of conscience and discriminate against individuals based solely on their conscientiously held beliefs. So that these legislators are ignoring the Constitution of the state of Minnesota by attacking this legislation.
That's why we believe the conscientious exemption, the philosophical exemption, is very strong. But it's also the reason why we think the use of these omnibus bills is very dangerous, because once they're in the omnibus bill, and if it does pass and signed into law, it's very difficult to go into this state and try to appeal to a federal court or a state court all the way up to the state Supreme Court and extract that information. So they know they can dump it into an omnibus bill, and if it passes and gets into law, it's very nearly impossible to retract it. And that's why we have to stay vigilant right now.
Okay, well, we're running in on time. So let's quickly talk about the last bills. That bill, House File 3775 and Senate File 4017. The combination of these bills restricts the conscientious exemption by requiring an indoctrination consultation with the child's healthcare provider and the completion of what I'm calling a vaccine re-education module. They call it an education module. I'm calling it a re-education module. It also adds the American Academy of Pediatrics driven school attendance exclusion criteria during an outbreak where children with conscientious exemptions could be excluded from attendance at schools and childcare facilities. So this bill is now in the the House file is in the House Finance Committee. The House file is authored by Representative Tina Liebling, and she's a Democrat attorney who's endorsed by the Minnesota Medical Association. She's on the committee where the bill resides. I have a couple of things here from her Facebook page. She has a post condemning Republican legislators pushing to get the Mayo Clinic to end the COVID vaccine mandates. And she reposts, we have a slide for this. Can you pull up the next slide? Okay, great. Yeah, there it is. She's criticizing Republican legislators who are backing nurses who don't want to get the vaccine. And she's bashing them, and she's, almost poking fun at someone who didn't take the vaccine, who was concerned about vaccine safety, that they died from COVID. Just not a very nice individual here, supporting parents or medical freedom at all. And so anyway, the Senate file is also sponsored by Liz Bolden, who sponsored the other bill too. So you've got either attorneys or people in the medical field, all Democrats, and all people that are against parents making their own decisions, and they're not friends of parental rights or medical freedom at all. So very concerning about that. Now, just on these bills, I just want to say that just because parents do their research and decide to not vaccinate doesn't mean they aren't educated. They don't need a coercive indoctrination session. We know these sessions with their doctors. They're going to be biased. They don't need to be re-educated. This is condescending. They don't require kids who get vaccines to be educated. They want to educate the ones who don't want to get it. Very one-sided, should not pass. And anyway, I just wanted to say that historically, there have been far more bills filed in Minnesota, especially after COVID, trying to prohibit vaccine mandates than to force vaccines. So yes, this trend of these bills is concerning. I'm glad you highlighted the omnibus threat. So this is why our best strategy is to educate legislators. Right now, we have on the next slide, here's what you need to do. Contact your Minnesota state representative and senator and ask them to oppose these bill numbers. And then what you can do is you can also ask them to oppose any other effort to remove or restrict vaccine exemptions, and explain why it's important to your family to not be forced to vaccinate, to attend school or childcare. Explain why you should be able to delay or decline vaccination for your child without being forced to consult with your doctor or anyone else. This is where you need to go. You just need to voice your strong opinion. These are the bill numbers, but also it's important that you say, or any other attempt that shows up in language anywhere, to either remove, eliminate, or restrict vaccine exemptions. So we've got a slide here to show you how to find your legislators. You can go to the NVIC advocacy portal, but also you could go to ledge.mn.gov, and there's a spot where it says, who represents me. You can fill in your address and it'll pop up. You get all their contact information right there. So Wayne, do you have just any last minute closing tips on talking to legislators in Minnesota to help families out?
Well, a lot of times families or parents, they get intimidated by wanting to contact a state legislator. They don't need to be, because most of these people are just common folks. We got a lot of legislators that are, yes, they're attorneys or maybe a doctor, but also people who are maybe insurance agents. They might be plumbers, who knows? But they need to be contacted, because most of them don't receive hardly any constituency type information from the voters unless it's a bill that for some reason they're very concerned about. So all it took, one state senator says, I might receive 2 or 3 phone calls. That's all on a bill. But if he receives 10 or 15 phone calls, then he knows is that something's going on. So that's what we need to do, is make sure we contact our legislators. Just tell them your story briefly and tell them why your concerns are. You do not have to be a professional medical advocate. You just need to be a parent and tell them, this is what concerns me. And then that's all you need to
Speak from your heart. Speak from your heart. Tell your story. Right. And oppose any removal or restriction on exemptions, vaccine exemptions. It's that simple. That's all you have to do. A phone call, a quick email. All the contact information is there. You can even stop by for a visit. They're in session. You can find out when they're going to be there. You can call up if you want to go down to the Capitol. All right. Well, Wayne, I so appreciate you being on today to help get this information to everyone. We want everyone out there sharing this show with others. And we also, on the NVIC Advocacy portal, nvicadvocacy.org, we have all the steps on action alert on the Minnesota page. You can go there and get that action alert. It has the steps, it has a description of the bills, all that's there. And thank you for joining us. Please consider donating to NVIC and Children's Health Defense so we can continue this great work. I do want to mention that normally we meet every 2 weeks for this show, but we're switching to be on the off Wednesdays. So our next show will be on the 23rd of April, Wednesday at 10:30 Eastern Time, 9:30 Central, 7:30 Pacific Time. Wayne, thank you so much for being here. We'll keep up with you on this. We'll stay on top of this. And God bless y'all. God bless America. And have a great week. Bye-bye.
So what's your name?
Kathleen Malinakis.
And what's your name?
Mary Kimball.
Okay, and your mum to you?
Yes, this is my mother.
And this is a story about your daughter?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to go ahead and tell us the story?
Well, I'm the second oldest of 6 children. My parents had their 6th child when I was 11 years old. And our little sister's name was Corinne Joy. And she gave us a lot of happiness. I just remember, even now, what a sweet little baby she was. And we were all so thrilled that she was in our home, that we could share with her and play with her, or just enjoy our little baby sister. And then we went up to the mountains one day. We had a property that's an hour and a half away from our home, and all the kids went to take this little vacation. And all of a sudden we were told to run out into the car. We had to take Corinne down to the clinic. And we didn't know what was going on. But we came, it was an emergency. We went down the winding road. My mom was breathing into her mouth. She had stopped breathing just in her crib for no reason. And so it was the only time they took her in. The medical people said that she had passed away of what they called SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. But they also interrogated them as if they were, child abusers. And so that was very upsetting, wasn't it, Mom?
Oh, it was terrible.
So
you forgot to say that when we first arrived up in the mountains there at Cedar Brook, she cried. She cried a whole lot. I was the mother. This was my sixth baby. I knew how to take care of children. We had brought all these other children with us to have a little weekend at the mountain cabin. She cried incessantly.
Couldn't figure out what was wrong.
We couldn't, and then to find out she was not breathing. I was breathing into her mouth. I was an experienced mother. I had 6 well children.
And so, yeah, it was the only time that I saw my tough businessman, football player, former Army sergeant father cried is when she died. So you figured out that she had had a DPT shot 2 days before. And so then
I started reading everything
Yeah.
I could because I didn't know what had happened. It had hurt me so bad. And I heard of this thing called SIDS, sudden infant death. There were other babies that were dying.
yeah.
And I thought, well, that's like mine.
But they never said it was a vaccine injury. They never said it could have been because of vaccines. And so, I'm only 11 at the time, but it was very traumatic, for our family for a long time. But I became a nurse and I took medical training, and I gave immunizations in the doctor's office. And I never got any training about vaccines except when to give them, that you might get a sore arm or a anaphylactic reaction. Those are the two main, very mild or very severe. There's all these other ones in between, come to find out. And that you have to keep the children up on their schedule. Nothing about side effects except what the very mild or extreme, or ingredients. And yet we're taught to be very careful about drugs. You have to be aware of side effects. Maybe there's drug interactions. There's contraindications. You be very careful of the dosages. You have to double check to make sure that it's the right dose. But why don't we do that with vaccines? It's really amazing. So I didn't think about that when I'm working in the doctor's office, or when I was forced to get the flu shot because I volunteered at the hospital as a retired nurse. And yeah, I got a sore arm, so I didn't want to get one year. But COVID comes along and nothing made any sense medically. It had a very low death rate compared to what they were saying it was. I asked my doctor, he didn't even know the death rate. He said, oh, it's very deadly. Well, I look it up, it's 0.1% of people that die. I said, that's the same as seasonal flu. And then they stopped counting flu, and they folded that in with the COVID deaths. So I said, what is going on? This is really, and thing after thing after thing didn't make sense. Masks, I was trained not to wear masks for more than 20 minutes at a time, and only when you're in close contact with the patient. So that didn't make sense. And then shutdowns, you don't quarantine the healthy, you quarantine the sick. And so and then the thing that really set me off as far as red flags, we cannot get back to normal till the entire world is vaccinated. I said, that does not, there's something wrong there. So then I really started looking into vaccines, and that's when I found out about the DPT shot and about the lack of liability, and how it was the DPT shot and all the babies that were dying from it that caused them to go to Congress and ask to take the liability off, because so many babies were dying of SIDS and sudden infant death. So I wanted to warn my neighbors about the COVID shot, and I started looking into vaccines in general, and I was shocked at so many of the ingredients. Like, there's toxic ingredients, there's mercury and lead, or mercury and aluminum and other metals, and carcinogens like formaldehyde, and so they don't do control group studies. Infectious diseases disappeared before vaccines even came on the scene. And so I started collecting all this, and I wanted to warn my friends and neighbors and family. So I put it into a book, and I just got it printed up myself with all the footnotes, with all the references, with all the links that I had found, all the red flags. And so I've become an activist, because my little sister, that should happen to no one. And And so I don't want it to happen to anyone else. And I'm trying to educate people, including doctors. I thought, well, maybe
So how can people get that?
It's on Amazon.
Oh, it's
and
on Amazon.
I'm going to put it into a second edition to because I...
So it's for doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, patients, parents, policymakers, and members of the public.
Yeah, it's for everybody. I mean,
Risks and benefits of vaccines.
but it's very accessible with the main points, and just, you know, a lot of people don't want to delve into the deep science. This is for the average person, but it's also for doctors because it has the footnotes and the charts and tables, you know, and so now they have the control group study with Glazer and
Thank you for doing that.
but Children's Health Defense has been amazing in spreading the information, and so I put a lot of your information in here. And so now this book is out though, and this on page 116 it has the mortality of SIDS, the studies that show you're 7 times more likely to have SIDS if you have a TPT shot.
Within 3 days.
Yeah, within 3 days, that's how many babies die versus unvaccinated. And same with this. So, I mean, they know the studies. They just are profiting from people's sickness and dying. It's really criminal. And so I'm an activist. I want to educate people, and you know.
Sorry.
But that's what everyone should do. They should, you know. But these are all, you know. I divided my chapters into what should be paradigm-changing facts. Any one of these should change the paradigm on vaccines. But all together, 10 of them, it should demolish the whole vaccine.
Thank you for what you're doing. Seriously, thank you.
The whole
So sorry about
paradigm.
your baby.
What did you say?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
first of all, do no harm.
Yeah. And that was what killed me too, is that, you know, they test one vaccine against another vaccine. So they say, well, this isn't the right numbers, but 5 out of 100 babies die of SIDS in the one group. 5 out of 100 babies die of SIDS in the other group. And then then they say, oh, okay, well then that's okay. But why don't they subject vaccines to the rigorous testing like other drugs? Because vaccines are drugs. They are toxic. They have toxic chemicals in them. And so, as a nurse, I was just shocked to find that out.
So you basically found out that your daughter and your sister was killed by a vaccination, but you only found that out in the COVID era.
Yeah, that's criminal, because they've known all this.
A big shock for your mum. A big shock.
You didn't know that until recently.
Oh no, I figured it out after
Well,
I read everything I could. Why had this baby? You know, I was this established mother. It just broke my heart.
But you never were told that it was a vaccine injury, or that
No, I never was. I just figured that out as years passed, and I read everything I could. I thought, I remember she had the DPT shot 2 days before. Would I have, if she was sick, would I take all those children up in the mountains? But I think it must have been that.
And you kind of wondered at the time, you said, that, well...
I know that sudden crying
but no one ever validated it. And
No.
so you just wonder, well, could it have been the shot? You don't know. And then...
They call it the DTaP scream. Because
Really?
so many babies scream and cry after the DTaP. It's
Yeah,
actually
like
called the DTaP scream.
58%, according to the package insert. Yeah. Why put your baby through that? And that's the thing that kills me too, is my little sister suffered before she died. I mean, for 2 whole days. You know, she must have been in pain. Like, that would have been terrible. Why would she be crying otherwise? So,
Well, thank
anyway.
you for telling the story. Thank you, both of you, for being here. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I just
Do you want something?
want to advise parents to be really careful, do your research, find out yourself. You cannot rely on the medical profession to just tell you, because
To tell you the truth.
no, because they've been wrong on a lot of other things before. Smoking, thalidomide, and
And the list goes on and on.
the list goes on. Bleeding people, they.
Thank you, though.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.